Election results in Pima County resemble the closest thing to a blue wave in Arizona. Democrats extended their reach by claiming an additional seat on the Board of Supervisors, ousting the county's Republican treasurer and putting Chris Nanos ahead of Mark Napier in the tight race for sheriff. For analysis, I'm joined by the Green Valley News Sahuarita Sun's Dan Shear and 1030 KVOI AM Tipping Point host Zach Yenser. My thanks to both of you for being here today. All right, let's start off with the sheriff race. Dan, I know you've been covering this pretty extensively. At this point, it's Thursday morning. We're talking, it does not look like a recount. So is Chris Nanos about to be the new sheriff in town?
It sure looks like it, unless things break very heavy for Mark Napier. It looks like Chris Nanos will be back in the position. And he and I spoke a few years ago when he was about to leave, and he said probably his biggest mistake was that he kept the same team in from Clarence Dupnick, and he should have just brought in his own people. So now, with it going from a Republican to a Democrat, we expect some changes, but I think that'll be on his mind, is that he wants his team in there to do what he wants to get accomplished. So we'll see if he does it.
Zach, how did this happen? I mean, he was not endorsed by the local newspaper. I mean, if you listened to the radio or if you were on social media, it looked like Mark Napier was going to win pretty easily.
Yeah, Lorraine, you hit on one thing that really confused me is that the Democratic establishment, by and large, in Pima County did not go very public for Nanos. If you look at who endorsed who, he was often off the list, and that always puzzled me a little bit. I've asked people, I've put my ear to the tracks and said, what happened here? And the best answer I've gotten, Lorraine, is that this was a situation where I think there was a lot of voting Democratic down the ballot in light of the presidential election. And Lorraine, it was a tumultuous 2016 year for Nanos. And it's amazing to me that I think the voters either forgot that or overlooked it 4 years later. And I can only say it's got to be down the ballot voting, all D's for so many voters in Pima County.
All right, Dan, you were on the program a couple weeks ago. You talked about how the Pima County Board of Supervisors would remain much of the same as it has been in the last 400 years, though, let's be honest, none of us were here for that. Matt Hines is a new voice on that seat. He is a physician. How do you see him coming in and maybe shaking things up?
I think the only way he's going to shake things up is that he's going to make the conversation a lot more interesting. But I think at the end of the day, we're probably going to see a lot of 4-1 votes, with Steve Christie, the lone Republican, being on that lopsided end. But I do hope that Matt Hines brings in a little more pragmatism, some common sense, some open mind to some of the issues that the county is facing. Then the question would be, but who would be the third vote? And so that's why I don't see a lot of things changing, other than, again, I think that the meetings will be a little bit more interesting.
Zach, let's say it wasn't so partisan. I mean, does Steve Christie have the ability to craft any sort of policy here in Pima County that could go up against the Democrats, where they say, you know what, let's just do what's best for Pima County, not look at this as D versus R?
I think Steve Christie has the ability to do that. His background as a business person in Southern Arizona, I think he represents his district well in that sense. It was a tighter race, maybe between him and Steve Diamond than many expected. In fact, the night of the election, I think a lot of people thought that he was going to lose that seat as well. We might have a 5-0 board of supervisors, 5 Democrats, no Republicans, but he pulled it out in the end. And I think his voice is helpful. I think Matt Hines was catapulted into the seat because of his background in public health and as a doctor. I think having Steve Christie's voice as someone who is at least talking about the impacts of COVID recovery and economic recovery on business is going to be helpful. And I also do see, though, potentially his voice becoming stronger out of necessity, maybe becoming a little bit less pragmatic just out of necessity, being the only Republican. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I'm not quite sure how to read it yet.
All right, let's move on to marijuana is legal in Arizona. There will be a new tax hike. What happened to this Republican conservative stronghold that once was Arizona? Zach, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there's a lot of my friends who are on the left side of the spectrum who think that this is a temporary blue shift, that this may not be something that is permanent. It's kind of my gauge on Prop 207 was that it was a much more improved version of what we saw back in 2016, that it solved a lot of the problems that that version of the proposition on the ballot back then had in it. I think that in light of some of the social justice issues and the impact marijuana charges have on that, I think was one element. I think that growing a bit of a tax base in that way was another. I also always felt the no on 207 just had the weaker argument. It didn't have a strong enough pull for voters to get behind it. I thought that the yes on 207 was more clear and more engaging. And I think to some level, it came down to those three things for me.
Well, the yes on 207 had all the funding, and that's what drove it. And those are the people who are going to be making all the money off of us. And I think we're going to see some very devastating circumstances as a result of this. But I think voters went for it largely because they've seen several other states do it, and they haven't seen anything out of there that has been overwhelmingly negative, even though there really have been. And I think it's a sad day when we have to fund through pot what we want to get done in this state, and it's really too bad. So what is next? I am glad that a lot of the laws were dealt with through this proposition. I think that that's a very a positive thing, but I wish that the whole thing had just gone through the legislature, because then it would be easier to make fixes on the run rather than overturning a proposition, which would be very, very difficult.
All right, Zach, let's move on to the Senate race. At this point, it looks like, Mark Kelly's already in Washington, D.C., getting oriented in the process of becoming the new senator. Martha McSally, at this point on Thursday, has not conceded the race. What's the significance of having yet another person from Southern Arizona to represent the state in the Senate?
Yes, I mean, it is significant. And I think there are two things that stand out to me underneath all the campaigning that Martha McSally did in her Senate races. And as a senator, more importantly, I think a lot of people forget that many of the legislative items that she pushed through in the Senate were very locally beneficial. Udall Park, some of the water legislation. There was a lot that was done for Tucson that nobody really talks about. And so I would certainly hope that having Mark Kelly now as a senator, that his legislation will not just even focus statewide or nationally, but will have local benefit like we saw with his predecessor. The other thing I think that stands out to me, maybe a story that doesn't get talked about enough, is I've been talking about Tucson as a Southwest hub for space tech. We've seen victories start this week. Of course, worldview was a huge element of the campaign, both positive and negative. So many space missions that are done in partnership between the U of A and NASA. We really have a potential to grow our brand in Southern Arizona as a space exploration and space technology hub. And I think in that sense, politics aside, having a senator with that background representing Tucson, I think has some really intriguing opportunities for us here in Southern Arizona.
Well, he's a spaceman. That'll probably help. But we have to remember two things. One, that 5 million of Arizona's 7 million residents live in the Phoenix area, and this man is up for reelection in 2 years. That's where his focus is going to be. I hope to have some benefit down here, but really, he's not a Southern Arizonan. His wife is, and any history he may have on the area certainly came from her, and it would be rich and meaningful, but pretty much he doesn't. So I think he's going to be focusing on the Phoenix area because of the population. We would fully expect that. I get it. I'm not seeing too many benefits of him having a house in Pima County.
All right, it remains to be seen. My thanks to Zach Yenser from KVOI The Tipping Point and Dan Shear from the Green Valley News Sahuarita Sun. Thank you.